Hi guys, it's me, Jack, here at the Social Yet Distanced, and tonight we got a special guest, Kellyanne Parker, well-known writer from the western sides of the country, and a friend and frequent visitor to many of the online poetry events that you may have attended. That's how I got to meet her, through many friends who we all like to gather and show off our work together. So that's how we've come together, and I know that you've come to the right place because we got lots of good stuff for you. Say hi, Kellyanne. How are you?
Hello to everybody here, and just thank you, Jack, for inviting me. I am a big fan of your work, and I love the ways that we connect in the poetry world, and I was really honored to have me join you.
We'll see when this is all over. I got the gotcha questions in my back pocket. Um, so tell me, Kellyanne, I mean, you and I met with Paul and some of those guys in Oakland, some of the online events and those kind of things. How did you wind up there? From your history all the way through writing and slinging poetry on the West Coast.
That's a great question. Thank you. I have always written poetry, and I come from a very artistic family. I didn't know my dad's family that much other than my grandparents, but my mom's family, we were very close. And my mom is Mexican American, and we had a very close-knit family. And every Sunday was a big gathering at my grandmother's house. And every Sunday, somebody would be playing guitar and everybody would be singing along, and I would read my poetry and somebody would be painting in the backyard. And, there was just always some sort of artistic expression. And, people that ended up going into film and to a variety of different creative fields. I was introduced to poetry by my grandmother. She was a very big fan of poetry. She wrote a little poetry herself. And so that was where I really fell in love with it. And what I found as a child who, had experienced quite a great deal of trauma, which we'll talk about, as we go through this, but poetry was the one way that I could explain either what was going on, how I was feeling, connecting to my feelings in a way that regular language couldn't. And so it resonated so deeply in my soul. I felt like the rest of the world couldn't me at all. And the only way that I could be seen was through my poetry. And what ended up happening was, I was born in Los Angeles, moved when I was about 24 to the Bay Area, and lived in the Bay Area for about 35 years. And during that time, I had continued to write, but what ended up happening was I had a very good friend who, she and her husband were both poets, and we had sort of exchanged this part about ourselves, and she was trying to get me to go out and go to poetry readings with her. And I was a single mom, and going out at night was not an easy thing to do. And I finally worked it out. I knew I had to. It was one of those things where I couldn't not do it. And I ended up writing, a signature piece of mine for the first couple times I sat in the audience. And then, maybe the second or third time I wrote a piece called The Abyss, which was about a family member's depression. And it, it would, you have some of those that literally save your life. And that was one of those pieces.
Yeah, I definitely relate to those feelings. I think my circumstances were different. I was a little bit younger. Um, But I remember it was a sense of relief um, when I realized that I could retell the story I was actually living through words. I wrote a piece when I was about seven called Freddie the Rat. And I remember how impressed my family was by this writing, but they didn't get it. You know,
Yeah.
Freddie was living in a cage and he was not liked by most people. And that was very indicative of kind of where I was in my life at that point. Um, but that click that happened when I realized that happened is what made a difference. And my writing has always been linked to at least the story of me, if not the survival or the trauma of me.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah, and it's interesting, so my early reading was just to my family on these Sunday gatherings. And it was my mother's youngest brother. My mother's the oldest of 13, and the youngest was only a year older than I was. Mexican Catholic family, that's what you get.
Sure, sure.
And so he was like a brother to me, and he was an incredible guitar player, great singer. And so he and my sister were in a band, and we I would sing with them too. But one time when we were early teens, maybe 13 or 14 years old, and he said to me, you know, you don't have to rhyme in all of your poems. Why don't you, try to break out of that? And it completely opened up everything to me. And I found my voice that I didn't know I had.
So, did that lead to changes in your education at that point? Did you pursue English and writing because of that?
I wish I could say yes, but part of my story in terms of trauma was when I was in high school in the 11th grade. I was a victim of violent crime, and I literally got slut shamed out of high school in 11th grade. So I never went to 12th grade. I later went back to community college, and so had a chance to continue and pursue that, which was wonderful. But who knows what would have happened if that didn't happen.
Yeah, I believe me, I know I got my GED in prison. Okay, so I I know those kind of tales. Well, so you traveled down this path and you found your creative expression by the grace of the creative hurricane you were living in the middle of, and I find myself quite jealous of that actually. Um, where do you go from there? How do you end up putting pen to paper and putting it out in the streets where people can read it and hear you speak it?
Yeah,
What's that
so
journey look like for you, I guess?
the journey started when I went with my friend to poetry readings, and I felt like I found my people. And I was also really grateful that it was largely a queer community too.
Right.
So, I was a, single mom, and, didn't have a chance to go out all that much. And here I'm like deeply steeped in queer community and creatives and poets and performance artists. And it really opened up my mind to what was possible. And
Right.
so it gave me permission to push the boundaries more. And so a lot of my early writing, talked about like, pain and heartbreak and things like that. But as time, went on, when I started doing poetry readings, I started talking more and more about my mental health. And that was, and actually, I'll tell you the story, what happened. So I was doing, open mics more and more with my friends' invitation to get me to go. And there was a queer trans open mic in Oakland, and I started going to that. And it literally, I called it church. It was like church. I came out of it reborn, a new person. And so, one of the things I'll share here is that I have dissociative identity disorder. And when I was first diagnosed in 1991, it was still called multiple personality disorder. So, I had been diagnosed, and for over 20 years, I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell other people. I knew as a child that I was different and there were things about me I couldn't tell other people. And as an adult, I was sure that if I told the people in my life what was going on with me, that they would reject me, they wouldn't love me, I wouldn't be accepted, all the things. And so I went to this Square Trans open mic at Perch Cafe at Lakeshore in Oakland, and somebody got up and they shared their story about having DID. And by that time, it was called DID. And I had been in group therapy with people that had it, but there were underground like newspapers and things like that, but I had never been in a room where people said it out loud on a microphone to a bunch of people that they didn't know. And I said to myself, I'm going to do that next. I'm going to do that next week. And sure enough, a week later comes, and I got up and I thought I was going to throw up on the people in the front row, but I got it out of my mouth, and I was just given nothing but love, and welcoming. And that was really life affirming for me. And then I decided that I was going to write more about it and more explicitly, and not just slightly veiled references, that I was going to explicitly write about what it's like to dissociate, what it's like to, you know, have, moments where you find yourself what I called being dropped out of the clear blue sky, that
Yeah.
which used to happen to me, where I'd be in elementary school and I wouldn't know how I got there, and I would have to figure out really quickly, like, wait a minute, what am I doing? Is somebody calling on me? What am I supposed to be doing? And to be able to talk about those things in a way that was depathologizing and destigmatizing, and help people understand that 1% of the population has DID, right? So
Right.
most people think 2.5% of the population has bipolar disorder, and so 1% has DID. So basically, you've met somebody who has it. You just, if you don't know, it's because they haven't felt safe enough to tell you.
Yeah, I've had some very deep personal experiences with a girlfriend who was continually misdiagnosed, and I don't care to go much into the story other than say it did not end well. And um, there's a lot to blame to go around, but she's gone, and that's all that matters. The counselor in me wants to ask this stupid, curious question. When you talk about the onset of the DID, for you, or at least coming into your awareness, how old would you say you were?
When I knew,
Yeah,
so um,
between that and when you were actually diagnosed, I guess would be the question.
yeah. So so I don't use the word alters, I use the word
Right.
others, right? So there are other parts of me, one in particular that I was aware of since I was about 5. And I knew that other people didn't have that, and I knew it was an imaginary friend.
Okay.
And so as I got older, I became more aware of that difference in me. And I knew that I absolutely could not talk about that. I just kept a lid on that to
Right.
myself. Yeah.
As you would, I would think. Yeah, that's of with my experience in mental health, that's one of the issues that I just don't know the least about, and I understand the least. And but what I do know is that the answers for anything are the same. It lies in the an accurate diagnosis and an accurate treatment plan and a surrounding supportive community. It's going to walk you through that. And it sounds like that you may have gone down some trails, but that's where you landed, and that's a beautiful thing to me.
I got very lucky in that my first psychologist, she was a PhD candidate, and her research was around using internal family systems for people with DID. And she was working with a woman who was doing similar research, but for people with borderline personality disorder. And so
My
they put
favorite
together,
girlfriends.
oh, there you go. Yeah, that can be hard.
Yeah.
Um, and so they put together a group of women that had gone through early, extreme, long-term sexual abuse. And knowing that that's kind of the recipe for making these two things. Or you're not born with it, these are made. And sure enough, the other woman found her people, and my uh, psychologist therapist found me and two other women. And so we were basically, she did her research on myself and a couple of other people. And she was very, explicit. I knew about the whole thing. I remember when she actually got her PhD and we celebrated. And so I was very lucky because the what was being done early on was like forced integration and all a bunch of things that we know now are not the appropriate ways to, this is not just a pathology that has to be fixed. There it's a system that was developed to deal with extreme, trauma. And for what people that aren't familiar with it is when you look at dissociative disorders, you look at like PTSD and then CPTSD, and then, DID goes sort of along that spectrum. And it's sort of just a different compartmentalization of, the more frequent, the earlier it starts, those are
Right.
the things that help uh, kind of steer you towards the way you deal with it, if you deal with it this
Right.
way or that way.
Right.
And yeah, and so I'm happy to talk about it. I started talking about it when I would do poetry reading. Start out by saying, according to the World Health Organization, 25% of the global population deals with mental illness or addiction, and we don't talk about it.
Right.
And as we've had a conversation about this before, is that often addiction is comes out of self-medicating, mental illness, and much of that comes from trauma.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt. Most, when I think back on my experiences, most of them were trauma-induced of some way or the other. And even if you would call neglect from a parent trauma, I mean, I do.
It is
So,
trauma. Yeah.
so I think you're right. Absolutely. It's the time, the onset, this intensity, who the actual bad guy is in the picture, and where's the support or no support. All those things play a factor. And again, that's kind of where I take I'm trying to I developed an overall dislike for labels, period.
Hmm.
Because I feel like even in mental health, you look at symptoms, and the tendency is to assign those symptoms to a specific category, and that completely leaves out the individualization of what that person might need for in the form of treatment.
Hmm.
And then it becomes these cookie cutter treatment plans that just they're applicable to some, but not necessarily all. And I think that's where we drop the ball sometimes on mental health. And one of the reasons why I left,
Yeah. Well,
I
you
got
know,
tired
and
of watching the doctors make all the money, charge $50 for 15 minutes time. I mean, charge $200 for, you know, 15, 20 minutes worth of time. And I'm babysitting these people for the rest of the time, trying to teach them how to live, you
yep.
know, it really kind of
You
pissed
know,
me off.
it's sort of this, it in some ways, like naming something gives you an idea of like, of what it is. But on the flip side of it, like what you're saying, is that by sticking a label, then, there's all the stigma that goes with that. There is the assumptions that go with that. And one of those assumptions is that everybody's experience is the same. And it's not, usually with any type of diagnosis, there's a spectrum within that of,
Sure.
what people's experiences are. And
Exactly.
obviously, yeah. So what the
Well, and
treatment,
it's like what they call DID now, back when it was MPD, that, you couldn't mention the word MPD without hearing civil.
yeah.
You know?
Oh, yes. Trust me, I know. I like when I hear
I
references to,
thought you might appreciate that.
yes,
But
yeah,
that's the way it
that,
was when I was a counselor, and I was like, wait a minute, that's not even real, dude. What are you talking about?
yeah, it is,
Well, you
the
got any
media.
poems you might want to read about that?
Sure. Yeah, I do, as a matter of
Yeah,
fact.
give
Uh,
us one.
so this first poem I'm going to read is about what dissociation is like. It's called Instructions to Insulate from Moonlight. Wear malachite, drink hawthorn berries, prepare for the next cycle in the infinite loop, and remember to breathe when the sun starts to fade and paints clouds from below while anxiety grows into a flower named dread. Snapping photos to steal light, which I hide in my pocket to later conjure safety. But land eludes me, and I begin pacing in a rhythm. This is the dance of my culture. This is the dance of my youth, while my feet lift off the ground. And I float and I spin with no handhold in sight, no means to make it stop until I'm swept up in the current. Then the images come, first like faded Super 8, flash hypersensory, then to sensory fog that tastes of bile and rot. It slowly slows the nauseating spinning, rapid flipping, familiar state of dissociation, a familiar task that elude me like opening doors. So I wait before them until memory returns. And after running from this burning building of a body, avoiding mirrors to evade the reflection of the wild eyed animal eyeshine of the familiar and the totem, and nothing, then the nothing, the welcoming, familiar, nothing, weighty blanket of nothing. And I return, time lost, but grateful. I've survived another until the next full moon.
I don't know why, but at the beginning of that piece, I had that vision. There was a line, something about spinning, and I pictured the child dancing in their family and kind of where that went from there and how it was parallel, that same dizzy spinning.
There's a lot
But,
of
you know,
parallels, right? Hmm.
yeah, yeah, that's the way it struck me. You know what it means.
I know what it means, but yes, there's and the dance is a incredible metaphor for,
Mhm.
any number of things. We have uh, dances of, a culture could be your family. The culture could be, any number of things. And, there are choreographed dances where you do steps that you're supposed to take, and then there's obviously, the dance of, whatever comes out of your soul too.
Yep, absolutely. So coming out of your soul, living through all that, and picking up the pen and paper, um, how does that end up being at someplace close to advocacy as well with your words as well as your actions? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, as I started writing more about mental health, I would open up my reading by talking about it. And what would happen would be at the end of every reading, because I write a lot also about sexual assault and things like that, um, people would come up to me, and I've had, you know, men, uh, you know, senior citizen men who have come up to me and told me things that they had never told anybody before. And, the fact that I can just be present and hold space and give somebody a safe place to share that information is very affirming that, that reading it out loud is advocacy. I did an express talk at NamiCon a couple years ago, about my lived experience. I've
NAMI as in NAMI.
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay, so for everybody that doesn't know, it's National Association of, what is it?
uh,
Mental
mental illness, I think.
mental
Yeah,
illness. Yeah, I think it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a national organization, and they have a national conference every year. So I had a chance to do an express talk there.
And tell me about that though. How did it go? I'm sorry I interrupted.
Oh yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, it went great. You know, I'm at the place now where I'm no longer nervous talking about it.
Right.
Was not always true, obviously. And so I find that when I do talk about it, people talk to me about their family members or themselves, or, share things that they're too afraid to do publicly. And so that's why I do it.
Well, I mean, I guess the whole NAMI thing kind of struck me. I would love to know what their response was too. It's kind of like because they were the ones setting the tone for addiction counseling at the time. And there's a couple of different addiction associations, but they were the ones that kind of directed that whole thing. So I had a lot of dealings with them. And it's interesting to know that they ventured off or, into other things as well, and that they're promoting advocacy for that as well. It just makes me smile. That's all. I know
Yeah.
there's lots of paperwork.
I uh I applied to do an express talk, and I was like one of a dozen people chosen out of, I think they said like 800 people. So I, felt pretty honored to be able to do that. And, it's hardest to talk about it. But I found myself, I was talking about it in these intimate spaces where, poetry readings are really safe spaces. And then I was working on my book, and Nomadic Press decided that they were going to publish it. I was so excited, very grateful. Grateful I got to work with, J.K. Fowler, and he is just amazing. And my editor, M.K. Chavez, who was also my, person who I wanted most to edit my book. And
She's so
as
cool.
we were getting closer to the book publication, I would kind of take out things that were explicit about having DID, and I would revise it and put in something that was a little bit more ambiguous. And I was like, put it in, take it out, put it in, take it out. And I remember finally texting him saying, I'm going to do it. I know I'm going to do it. I'm terrified, but I'm going to do it. And then I just, hit submit and set my final the final draft of my manuscript, and I was
So
sick to my stomach.
was the out so with all that fear and anxiety prior, what happened after? How did you feel after that?
Relief. I felt like an incredible amount of relief.
And the results were completely not at all what you fearful of, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, not at all. And so, as you can imagine, I, I put it in the book, and then people that I worked with, were friends with me on Facebook.
Oh,
So I sat my boss at the time down and said, "Hey, I just want you to know I have this book coming out, and this is what it's about." So I had to let people know so they wouldn't be surprised by, poetry readings and book launches and stuff that I was going to be doing, that I would be talking about it.
right, right.
And that was, yeah, I mean, and I'm gay, but this was a harder coming out. It was a much harder coming
Oh, I
out.
could imagine. Yeah, I could imagine. Assuming the response went well
It
from the
did, yeah.
employer.
It did go really well, and it went well with my colleagues. And I did have a couple of people. I remember telling another fellow poet, they heard that my book was coming out, and they're like, "Oh, what's your book about?" And I said what my book is about, and they took a little step backwards. I don't think they realized that they did it. And I was like, "Well, that's all right." And they came
Yeah.
around, but that was their first initial response. I'm like,
Yeah, my
"All right."
my girlfriend or my who became my wife was I met her in the program and she was a junkie from way back. And I introduced her my dad and stepmother, and my stepmother literally says, "So what was your drug of choice?" And my wife says, "Heroin." And my stepmother literally had to put her hands on the counter and lean back and goes, "Heroin?" It's like, yeah, I wonder why.
Oh my gosh. Yep, that sounds kind of like a similar situation. Oh my
It's
goodness.
funny, but it's
Yeah,
it's all lack of education. People don't
yeah,
know, and yet chances are in their life they're dealing with all of the associated turmoil and don't even realize that's where it's coming from.
absolutely.
I used to get really anxious in crowds and then never understood why. Well, I have some clues now about why that was, you
Mhm.
know. Um, and if I just go into it with some label of what I'm supposed to be based on the behavior, I'm going to miss the boat.
Mhm.
And then I'm not, my goal is always to end up useful, you know, and be able to be of service and have the right tools in my equipment when the time is ready. And it never works that way, but it's a great thought.
Oh, I'm sure it works. It just not doesn't work perfectly, because nothing does, right?
Well, of course, and it never ends up in a paycheck, which is the big mystery. Never has, never will. What's wrong with Jack?
Right.
Why does he keep thinking that? But I'm a street guy. I'm the guy that will buy your McDonald's, behind your back, and not want any credit, just slip the money to the register, to the lady behind the register and say, take care of this lady, or whatever. That's the kind of thing I like to do. I mean, I tooted my horn for a while in the addiction field, but it just didn't go well, you know. It's
But
not the
that's
place for
cool.
it.
I mean, we need little angels around that,
Hmm.
that give people, little mini windfalls,
Hmm.
you know,
Some of the people
especially,
that were the harshest to me in my whole growth and through recovery and whatnot, I hated those people, you know. But you know what? They were right. And because I was willing to listen to what they said, some things changed, And that's all they promised, and that's what I got. And I believe that everybody has that same chance. But you
yeah.
got to be using the right tool, that's the
Mhm.
thing. So,
Well,
um,
you need to use the right tools. You need to, you need to be open to using the right tools too.
Right, right. And that's my problem is I get pushy and like, don't you see what you're doing to yourself, son? Why are you smoking cigarettes? Because that's what I grew up with, and that's kind of the way I carried my message sometimes. And it's because the people that knew I was going to die if I didn't listen to them had to smack me right in the nose to tell me. And that's what it took. Sitting in jail didn't do it. you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well,
I was
yeah,
real
sometimes
grateful for those jerks.
however they got the message through, it was a lifesaver,
Exactly.
right?
And we touched a lot of lives altogether as part of the process. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity and those people. Um,
Hmm.
how does that go? I mean, how do you maintain that advocacy and when you sit down to write, do you find yourself going forward or mired in some of the poison?
You know, when I finished the book, uh, there was a lot I was able to let go of. It was very cathartic. Um, and although there are things, some terrible things that happened that I didn't put in the book, but I felt like there was enough bad stuff in
Enough,
there. I
yeah.
didn't have to put it all in there. Um,
Well, then you
and
run the risk of sensationalizing it all,
yeah,
and it gets
yeah,
misunderstood.
it's which is not the point. It's really just to, have common ground with people who have gone through this, who haven't heard somebody like them talk about it.
Right. I agree 100%. My
Mhm.
downfall is I tend to stay mired in the old stuff and not go to where my hope really actually lives as much as I probably should. And, again, that's a personal struggle I'm very well aware of. So,
I heard somebody say once, and for me it's true, is that depression lives in the past and anxiety lives in the future. And I'm like a big future tripper, so I'm like the anxious one, um, and so hearing that said kind of reminds me like, oh, okay, I really needed to be grounded in the now and in the present, and I
right.
can't change what's happened, and I don't know if what I'm worried about is actually going to happen.
Right.
So that's kind of like what I need to do for my own self-care.
Yeah, I agree 100% for myself. Good luck, Jack. Any other book plans or tell you what, let's read one. Let's read another one.
Um, I will actually, so I'm going to read you, I was going to read something else, but I'm going to read, this is that poem that I wrote. This was the first poem I read in an open mic, and it's called The Abyss. It's a beautiful day, only you aren't part of any of it. I see you contemplating the water's edge, and you begin to walk slowly out into the water. I watch at first unconcerned, then hold my breath and wait for what I know is coming. You walk slowly, intentionally, not stopping, until you pass the first and then the second break. I start yelling, telling you not to go out any further, but you aren't listening. You just keep moving farther away from shore until a large wave grabs you and pulls you further out. And I'm yelling for help, and people jump in and paddle out. And I swim to where you are, and you just go under before I reach you, but you don't fight it. This strange force pulls me down too. I fight and struggle to get to you. And the bubbles go up to the light toward freedom. But you and I, we just keep going down, down, down into the abyss, where the light starts to fade and the sound is muffled. I try to reach you, but you give me that look that says, it's too hard. And my lungs feel like they're going to burst, but All I see in you is resignation. But I won't stop. I can't stop. I won't. And the bubbles go up towards the light, toward freedom. But you and I, we keep going down, down, down to the abyss, where the light is just a speck at the surface, and all I hear are the sounds of my own struggle, and the rescuers busy themselves in a flurry of activity at the surface, and I negotiate with God, trading everything to bring you back. And the bubbles go up to the light toward freedom, but you and I, you and I, you and I don't.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just going to sit with that. I don't know that I have a response even. Um, it's so visual in the telling, but so simple in the words themselves. And God knows honest. Thanks. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
That's all I can say. So, what about your writing now? What are you doing these days?
When I'm doing this here, I'll read something to you. I am not the happy jolly writer, and I'm a person. I guess I would describe myself as, maybe a little melancholy, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
In kind of connected more to my shadow self. And I also, write about social issues, things that matter to me, things that make me feel, things that have meaning to me. This is called Children of the Borderlands, and it's from Letters for the End of Times, and it's for the volume 2 of Collapse Press.
We know them.
You know them. We know them. Children bloom between sidewalk cracks, a lottery of who's spared, but who really survives while puppet masters spin and spew. Only the oligarchs fatten with every payload. The people wither in a vacuum where a city once was. Lines in the sand grow deeper and wider, and who really knows how deep a border goes? Collateral damage is a nice name for killing people. Middle East, Latin America, Africa, Ukraine, repeat the familiar needle skip. Only the names have been changed. Throw a rock anywhere and hit a massacre. A border is another name for other. We annihilate others and never mourn, only wailing mothers of unnamed and unpaid vengeance that cannot end. It's not an eye for an eye, but an eye for all your descendants. Somebody's God is better than your God, and you see where this is going. And is it such a surprise who prospers off the worst of humanity? I remember Tiananmen Square, one small figure against a line of tanks. And who was here first? Today, a soft figure of a child blooms on asphalt. I didn't need to see her flag to know how much we've lost.
Sister. Yeah. So you write realistic stuff too, huh? Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not even going down that rabbit hole. I just can't. Um, I eat way too much of that fare to to engage any more than I already have. And the thought of even sitting down to write about it is frightening to me.
hmm,
And I applaud you for the way that you carry the message that I would like to be able to say. I just can't. And I don't because of fear. I have, I'm on disability. I have Medicaid and, things that are dependent on my life. So I like to grumble, but I'm afraid if I make too much noise that it's over. So I
it's a
have to
real
take it in
fear.
small doses.
Yeah,
Huh?
it's a real
I have to
fear
take
to,
in small doses, you know.
yeah, absolutely. And, the fact that you have this space where people can share, right? So,
Yep.
you know, the part that everyone can do is not, it's not the same. Like some people make
Right.
spaces for others, some people use their voices in that way. And both of those things are as important because it carries the message.
Well, and it's all the worlds, I mean, these are the worlds I live in, you know. I live in words, I live in people, I live in community, I live in, being informed and knowing what's going on. And I'm also a street cat and I know a lie when I hear it. And,
Yeah,
I see all the BS. And my despair lies in the fact that I'm, 60 years old now, and everything in my entire life that was touted to be progress,
yeah,
from civil rights to abortion to you name it, you know, is being ripped away one thing at a time. So it feels to me, and this is probably where the key is to writing about it, but it feels to me like it's all being ripped away, and like there was no point in me even being here, or anybody else, because this was supposed to be, and I don't buy that shit, you know, because it's greed is all it is. It's all it
yeah.
is. It's what drives it all.
It
And,
it is it is
it's
greed,
appalling.
but it does matter that you're here,
Yeah.
and our job, you know, is either to help make things better for the generations after us because the people before us did the same.
Right.
And sometimes you're just holding the ground. Like sometimes the best progress is just holding the ground, and that's important too. So it matters.
Well, and I think there's something to be said for communities, individual communities, whatever they may be focused on is a good thing in support and moving in a positive direction, just like it could be used for something very negative, which we won't talk about. But um, you know, I lose hope on a moment by moment basis, occasionally based on a news event, but I don't ever give up.
Yeah,
I mean, I just don't. And I will say what I want to say, and you can kiss my ass, you know.
I
Even
love
if you
that.
are the president. I mean, I don't care if you're the
Yeah,
president, I would say the same thing to you. I should write about you on Twitter. So
that's right.
anyway, that's enough of that. You get me riled up and I'll be in Guantanamo next thing you know.
I'll be in the cell next to you, so
Well, at least we'll have poetry.
we'll have poetry. We'll start a poetry reading.
Um, yeah, I'm big on revolutionary poets, and I'd like to be one of those. Too bad I don't write that well.
You know what?
But I
So,
like to build a neighborhood. This whole project was designed to be a neighborhood where
mhm,
books don't ever get banned and where people get introduced to people like yourself who may not get heard somewhere else. And if I build up an audience that says they like that video, they go buy a book. What the hell? Everybody wins. And we built a community that doesn't give up on each other and we encourage each other. And that's what I really started out with as the goal, and that's what I'm going to keep doing until I fall down. So Medicaid
well,
be damned.
you're doing a great job with that. But I will share something with you about my belief about poetry is that you know, I don't I don't focus on whether something's good or bad. And
Mhm.
and besides, who gets to decide that anyways?
Exactly.
That's my
I-
ultimately, I don't have an MFA, so I'd love to do that someday. I think it would be really cool to learn more about my craft that I take very seriously, even without the degree. But I'm a street poet. That is
Right.
who I am, and I'm very proud of being a street poet. What I've learned from people who've been street poets have been, to just speak your truth no matter what.
Right.
Um,
And there's a wide range of artists out there, whether they be poet, writers, novelists, whatever the case might be, and they all offer something different. So I agree with you. I don't necessarily see anything as good or bad. Is it does it hit my heartstrings or not?
Yes.
And that's the bottom line. There's some guys like Cesar Pavesi or Neruda that I'll freaking tear up in a heartbeat any time of the week. Then there's, Gil Scott Heron, and I'll, come tear your house down. You know,
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
it's all in it. It's not who or whether it's good or bad. It's how do you feel when you read it.
Yeah.
And, you know, in the writing that I do is it's designed in most cases to end with a punch so that you
Mm-hmm.
walk away and go, oh, okay. You know, it's not
Yeah.
necessarily about the craft or the words. It's more storytelling with a
Mm-hmm.
punch at the end.
Right.
And, I don't recall writing anything that really rhymes in a long, long, long time, but that's not me. That's so, and you can call it a poem or not. I don't give a shit what you call it,
Right.
it's
Yeah,
just words.
exactly. If it
And
needs to be said, it needs to be said.
words are the medicine, not the form, you know.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm pretty big on action behind the words, but that's a different that's a tale for a different time, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Is there anything that you would like to add in, like any future projects or places to get a hold of you or anything like that?
Oh, well, I do have a Facebook page and a website. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Instagram as Kellyanne Parker. On Facebook, I'm on Kellyanne Parker Poetry. And I have a website, kellyanneparkerpoetry.com. So that's the best way to keep track of things that I'm doing in terms of readings and such. Um, and I have a couple of manuscripts that are working on finding homes. So, stay tuned. More will be revealed as far as that goes. And I do have one more poem I'd like to leave you with.
Please do. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. It's an old poem of mine and it's a favorite. I know we talked about some deep stuff, and so I want to leave you someplace else. And this is called
Oh,
Solitude.
thank you.
I find comfort in solitude. It's misunderstood and often mistaken for loneliness. It's not the same. Loneliness is a vacant crater. Solitude is different. Quiet conversation with yourself. Being alone, but not feeling alone. Comfortable quiet. Where the outspoken word is unwelcome and would shatter the calm stillness. Quiet is its own language, one understood by the speaker listener as one and the same, one's own true first language. I speak it well and do not pass it on to others, the part of me that's not shared, spoken here in the code of poetry, seen, not felt by others, as they would see their green and not mine. Practice your language, for therein lies all answers, answers true and just as if given to you by some higher power. And perhaps it is. Quiet conversations with you and your God. Some call it conscience, others inner self. Call it what you like. I have my own name, and I keep it to myself.
There you go. Thank you very much for that. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close up?
I just wanted to say thank you very much for having this wonderful, safe space. And it's been a pleasure hanging out with you.
Well, sit tight. I'm going to say goodbye to the audience, and then you and I'll wrap it up in the final. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for hanging out with us tonight. I hope you enjoyed our time with Kellyanne Parker. Take the time to go and read her words, and don't forget about us. You can like, share, subscribe, all that hoopla. And if you'll check in the description, you'll find links to where you can get discount on books and t-shirts and merch and anything else I can come up with to sell you. So there you go, and we appreciate you being here, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks very much, you guys. And